Thanks a lot for coming, everybody. Really appreciate it. My name is Todd Dayton. I'm a principal SE with VMware. Hopefully you guys are relatively familiar with us. We're down on the show floor as well, so feel free to swing by the booth and give our guys a chat. I've actually been with VMware for almost 8 years now, so I've seen kind of the rise of a lot of this technology. I'm very much a huge proponent of the end user computing space in general. So I spent a lot of time not only at VMware, but also in IT as well. So I used to work for a little company called Safeway that you guys may know about. I spent about 10 years there too, installing other people's software as well. So believe me, I know what it's like to kind of inherit problems and try to solve things along the way. And it's really been interesting for me over the last few years because we've seen really some dramatic changes in the way that things work just overall in the world. One of the big things that we're seeing is just kind of the rise of all of these new devices. And I think that conferences like the one that we're at today really kind of show exactly what kind of impact this is having on the world. So if you look at a lot of the statistics that are gathered from the Gartners and the Forresters and all those folks of the world, you very clearly see right away that while we've had kind of a universe that's been easily managed kind of in the Windows space, maybe not so easily, that those things are going to change whether we want them to or not. You know, almost everybody at this point has more than just a desktop or a phone or a laptop. They have a phone, maybe they have a tablet, they have a number of different types of devices, and more often we're getting a lot of pressure to work from different places and different locations trying to solve problems that we really didn't have in the past. And there's a number of different ways to look at this. My favorite is actually this slide right here, which kind of shows exactly how long we've been living in a Windows world from that perspective. And I think it's a little bit funny because we really had to go that far back to find a place in time where Microsoft didn't just completely and utterly dominate the desktop space and the way that we do things from a business perspective. So really, you know, there used to be some other technology that was around, but I think the part that's really the most critical to understand from what you're seeing here is that over the last couple of years, we've seen this dramatic kind of take and big shift in the way that people are using these things and what types of devices they're using. So primarily, as most of you know, this has come from the rise of iOS and Android as alternative platforms, and we've seen a lot of different organizations start to pick up these types of devices and you know, attempt to leverage them inside of their environments. I would say that in some cases they've been successful, depending on what your application load looks like. But for most people, it's been a really big challenge to try to meld these worlds together, right? Where we have a large kind of legacy contingent, if you will, of applications that have all of our, what we would consider real world data in a lot of cases. We've got some new fancy things that do work on our phones. For the most part, we can at least get our email, and I think in a lot of times that's what these kind of devices devolve into, right? Is if I can't do anything else, at least I can get my email and I can ping somebody that can go do the work for me. But we want to really try to solve some of these issues and kind of take advantage of this rocket of new technologies and really pick up what we're doing here and start to make it a lot easier to use these devices and leverage some other new things. Now, one of the other big pieces that we're seeing across a number of different industries, of course, is that everybody knows that this is going on. And there's a big movement towards kind of moving away from Windows 32 as a target platform. So in the past year, we've always kind of had our Windows applications, and that was the main bread and butter of everything that we've done. But even the core enterprise developers at this point have really started to drop that off. So in the last couple years, we've seen Windows 32 development as the primary target drop below 50%. Everybody's really working towards web-based applications, multi-tier pieces, you know, mobile device applications, and these kind of things as well. And this is happening regardless of anything else that we do. So really, it's on a lot of us to kind of take advantage of this situation. And there's a third big piece of this that I think a lot of people don't really see as much as we do sometimes in the tech area, and that there's an entire new set of users, an entire new piece of the workforce that's just coming into the market today. And all of these folks have been weaned on app stores and self-provisioning and the concept that I can take my device and I can put whatever I want to do on that thing. And if you're going to hand me something old and clunky and try to make me do my work on that, not only am I going to be unhappy, I'm going to find ways to work around you and to make sure that I can actually use these kind of devices. So we see a lot of organizations that say iPads aren't allowed, and what you find out that means is that your iPad is under your desk instead of on top of your desk, right? Which is completely kind of the opposite of where we want to be with these things. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this process, I was in IT for a long time, right? So in the 90s, I spent a good 10 years in IT, and I can tell you that we had a very specific way of doing things back then, right? And especially in large organizations, large entities, a lot of times the iron fist is kind of the only way that you can see to approach things, which is everybody has one device. That device really represents you as a user inside that organization, and anything that we do to kind of provide you access is delivered down to that one specific device. So you've got a Windows machine, you asked for an application, we gave you your application, go away, don't bug me anymore. But realistically, that's not the case anymore, right? So for example, we're all here, we're not sitting in front of our PCs at all. And in most of these scenarios, not only do we have a Windows machine or two or three and one at home and one that we use sometimes in other locations, well, we've also got a tablet, we've got a phone, we've got other kinds of devices that we actually try to do our day-to-day work on. So trying to actually deliver applications and to make sure that we can get access to the things that we need, I think is really the challenge of our time right now in IT, right? How do we make sure that somebody that doesn't have a laptop right in front of them can get in and get access to all of the content that we need? How do we make sure that as you're on the road, if you're in the car and you've just stopped over, that you can pull up that critical data that you actually need access to? And even more importantly, how can we start to take advantage of devices that people have already bought? I think this is one of the things that I find kind of the funniest in a lot of ways in IT is that someone will go out and literally spend $800 or $1,000 of their own money to buy a nice shiny black and chrome device and bring it to work and have them say, no, sorry, we don't support that. We only support your laptop that we got 5 years ago for you. Those types of things are the real challenges, and there's a lot of ways that this can not only save us money, but just make everybody kind of happier in the long run, make us all more effective. And there's one really big piece of this that's caused most of the trouble, I think, behind the scenes, and that's purely application incompatibility behind all of these various things that we've got. So if we look at the ways that people use their phones and all of these kind of things, we might have a couple specific applications. Again, I use the email piece as a reference for a lot of the things that people do. But most of our actual data, a lot of the things that we really need to get access to are still Windows applications today. No matter how hard we try, somebody's got a FoxPro database that we've got to get access to. There's some collection of geological data that's out there. Patient data needs to be stored on these critical systems. And there's just no way of getting around that. And I've seen tons of folks that have gone out and bought lots and lots of iPads and things like that for their organizations. We had one healthcare customer that right off the bat, as soon as Apple released these kind of devices, went out and bought 1,000 iPads. And they came around and they said, okay, we've got them now, what do we do with them? And they find out very quickly that, again, while you've got some very basic functionality that you can do with these kind of things, that they don't meet the needs of what people are trying to do in the real world when it comes to those kind of apps. Now, we know that there are some solutions to this, right? And one of the ones that we hear most often these days, you'll see a lot of this technology, and even at VMware, we're firm believers of this, is what most people would consider to be webification of these apps. So let's take the applications that we've got, let's port them to an environment where you don't have to have some specific device in order to get access to them, and then everybody can just pick up whatever you've got and connect up and use this data. And that's great, and I think from a long-term perspective, this is exactly what we're going to see most of these applications do, but it doesn't solve the problem right now. If you've got a set of 10 applications and you've converted 3 of these apps, that's great. You're still effectively out of the water anytime you want to get access to some of these other components. So what we need solutions that we can start to apply today, that we can leverage against the technology that we've already got, that can solve some of the issues that we have with these Windows applications and the things that we're already using, but can start to look forward and start to lend themselves towards being able to get in and get access from all of these various devices along the way. And at VMware, we've been spending a lot of time working on this over the last few years, trying to take those Windows assets that you've got and start to centralize them back into the data center. So instead of having a very complicated laptop or a desktop that sits out there on the edge of the network where it's very, very hard to manage, instead we want to gather all of that complexity. And we want to roll it back into the data center and provide that as a service that people can access on demand from any type of device that they've actually got. And then once we've collected that tricky piece, once we've gathered up all of the core content that's on it, we want to be able to broker those things, and we want to deliver that access out to multiple devices. And this is definitely not something that's brand new, right? The whole idea of VDI and kind of bringing down that virtual desktop into the data center where you can connect to it, right, definitely has some core pieces that people have looked at for years and years. So government, healthcare, education, all across the board, we've seen lots of places where the essential services can effectively be rolled up into one of these pieces and then connected to from effectively any type of device. So if I'm looking at a different component like an iPad or a phone or any of these types of things, it really starts to make a huge difference. And a lot of people say, well, yeah, we've seen VDI, and does this stuff really work? And how does that really apply to a lot of this technology? And so one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you guys about today is what I do kind of on a day-to-day basis. And to kind of start with, first of all, I'm not using a laptop to do any of this, right? I actually don't carry a laptop at all. I haven't carried a laptop since probably about 2010. So back then, we actually do a trade show in Europe called VMworld Europe, and was going out there and was going to end up spending 3 weeks in Europe traveling. And I said, I don't want to have to take my laptop. If I can make it through this 3 weeks without my laptop, I'm not going back. And I can tell you right now that 2010 was not the year to make that decision, right? It was miserable. There was problems with connecting to projectors. It was trying to find, connectivity in the right places. All of those things were really, really big challenges. And when you kind of combine that with a worldwide stage, right, it even makes it more complicated. But what I found over the course of that process was that I worked through all of those issues, right? That even though we kind of ran into some of those bumps, and I definitely felt like I was a little bit early adopter in some of those cases, that people were really working on those things. And I managed to actually get through it. And when I got to the end of it, I said, that's it, not going back. And literally, I haven't used my laptop except when I'm forced to periodically, ever since then. And it was funny because yesterday I was at a trade show where they asked me to have a computer that I could just plug into a projector and leave. So I booted it up for the first time, and there was 900 security patches, and it was like 3 hours worth of prep in order to get the thing going again. I was like, wow, I'm glad that I don't actually have to deal with this thing anymore. So when we look at what's really involved in starting to become truly mobile like this, I think there's a couple key components that really tie it together and make it kind of more accessible than people might already think that it is today. The first one is that any of these devices are going to have cached email on them, right? So if that's what you're looking for, if email is your prime kind of source of communication and the thing that you do in these cases, that's pretty much a slam dunk with anything that you buy today, right? I can't imagine anybody buying a mobile device that doesn't just support some sort of cache protected email that's on side of those systems. And for me, we can use that exactly with what we've got on here. At VMware, we have an email product called Zimbra. It works just as well with Outlook or any of the other kind of technologies that you guys might have for mail today. This is definitely not the challenge. And then the second piece was really around being able to get in and get access to new kinds of technology. So the new applications that really have already been webified, if you will. And these modern web applications, they work just great inside of these new mobile browsers. So all of these types of devices, they've got HTML5 browsers in them. They're all kind of up to speed. There may be one or two things that don't specifically work. A lot of times that's legacy technology, again, that's kind of been ported forward. But those things have gotten better and better and better since the time that I was talking about. The third piece is around data file sync and making sure that I've actually got the content that I want on my machine at any given time. And we've got a number of technologies. At VMware, we use something called Horizon. I'm going to show you guys some stuff around that in a little bit that make sure that when I don't need to get in and get access to the rest of my stuff, if I just need a PDF, if I just need a specific document that I want to pull up, I can do that very, very quickly on my device, regardless of which one I'm actually carrying around. And I think this is the one that really started to be a breakthrough for me. I spent a lot of time in airports and traveling around and all of these kind of things, and boarding passes are one of those things that you tend to leave on the printer someplace from time to time and forget that you don't have it when you go to the airport. And my process for doing these things has really dramatically changed. When I actually get all of that information, I basically just put the PDF into our file synchronization storage. It pumps it out to all my various devices. And when I get to the airport, you just pop it open on your phone, give it a swipe on most of the modern airlines, and away you go. And it really starts to kind of break down a lot of these things. So it changes things pretty dramatically. It starts to make you paperless automatically as kind of part of the process in some of these things too. But then finally, the last piece, and the one that I think is, kind of that I'm going to show you a little bit here of today, is around the virtual desktops and our ability to connect up and get access to a lot of the core Windows applications and those types of things off of these devices. And this has actually been very, very simple for a long time to do. It's even better right now with a lot of the technology that's out there. And I can tell you that, as I've been around the show today, I've been doing some specific things. And I'll give you an example of what this looks like from one of my devices. Let me just toggle over here for a second. And so what you'll see here is a very standard iPhone 4S running Microsoft Windows 64-bit, right? All of the applications and all of these kind of things that go right along with it. So the need to actually carry around a full laptop to do these kind of things, I think it's dramatically changed from where we used to be. So as you can see, we've got Arrow support, we've got all of the things that you'd expect. I've got some core applications loaded up, not a ton of real data for these kind of things, but my file sharing technologies, all of these various pieces, and even the capability to get in and get access to all of this stuff right off the bat. So the other thing that I want to point out about this is that there's not even any Wi-Fi in this room. I'm actually doing this over my 4G connection directly on my phone. So, times have really kind of dramatically improved, I think, since the initial steps that we took in order to do some of these things. And it just gets better and better with each iteration of the technology. So now I really feel like in most cases that even if I'm just standing someplace, if I'm standing in a convention center and all I've got is my phone, and like I had earlier today, somebody called up and said, hey, I need access to this thing, I can actually log in, I can give them access to effectively whatever they need, I can solve those problems, and I can do that without having to say, let me call you back in 3 hours, let me go find a desk that I can sit at, let me find some way that that I can get into this. And we do all of this with secure access that allows you to tie directly into these systems. So not only am I doing this over 4G standing here in front of you here, the system that I'm connected to is actually in Washington State, right? So this isn't even something that's actually local to us. This is all the way up the West Coast. And I keep all of my content there, and if I shut this down and I go out there and I fire up my iPad, I can pick up this exact same session exactly where I left off with all of this technology. So a lot of folks don't realize that it's really kind of come this far just from the basic access pieces of this. And some of the technology and where we are with it is actually pretty compelling. So it's not just a matter of basic Excel and these kind of things. We can even do components like some of the healthcare imaging technologies and these pieces today. And all of those things work even on your phone just like they might on an actual desktop itself, including, if I can get my thumb to work right today, some rotations and some of these kind of pieces too. But you get the basic idea, which is that we've really come a long way in terms of what you can do, even with the most basic pieces of technology that we basically already have in our pockets today. All right, so let me plug back into my bigger piece of glass. And one thing I will say about the iPhone technology and some of these smaller pieces, you absolutely don't want to be stranded on your phone most of the time, right? So 3 inches by 2 inches of glass, definitely not a great kind of feel experience most of the time for a full Windows desktop. Certainly not recommending that you get yourself into that kind of scenario for full work. But in a pinch, it's your daughter's softball game, whatever the case may be, all of a sudden it solves a lot of problems that you might have had previous to that. And one of the other big things that I hear quite a bit, here in a second, I might resync the projector here. There we go. One of the things that I hear quite a bit, right, is that workstations and PCs and all of these kind of things, well, they're for creation, right? So that's what people are really going to do their work on. And these tablets and mobile devices and these kind of things, they're really more for consuming a lot of this data. And one thing that I'll tell you is I absolutely believe that this is true, right? So when I sit down at home and I go to do some work and really kind of create a lot of this content, I have a thin client with a hard keyboard and a mouse, and I can get that tactile experience. And I think that for most of us, that's really, really powerful, and it makes us actually work faster in a lot of those scenarios. When I'm out traveling around, the iPad is definitely enough. There's keyboards that you can connect to it, so it actually makes it relatively easy. But I've heard this quite often. This is what I get from a lot of folks, is that part of the problem that we have with this is that, well, I still feel like I have to have a PC in order to have that kind of connectivity. And I've been doing this for a while, and I think it's actually pretty funny that workstation can be defined a lot of ways, right? And with a lot of the technology that you can bake into these kind of things, you can have a very, very compelling workstation with almost nothing. So I actually took this picture at my house just to kind of give you a quick demo of some of the ways that we can work. And this is the same phone that I'm showing you here with a Bluetooth keyboard and a regular monitor attached to it. When you do this and you plug it into a monitor, the actual phone itself becomes a trackpad with 2 buttons, just like you would have on a traditional laptop. So at that point, you can really use that as if it's your mouse. You can use the full hard keyboard plugged into your monitor, and away you go. So the idea of having an actual physical desktop here at this point, all of the hardware that's associated with it, I can keep that someplace far away where I don't have to listen to it grind, where it doesn't have to light my lap on fire just as I'm trying to do some relatively basic Windows computing from time to time. And I can tell you right now that from a traveling perspective, the TSA doesn't make you take a tablet out of your bag, right? So if you're a warrior that spends a lot of time in the airports, that piece of it alone is almost worth it from time to time as you kind of ease your way through a lot of those security lines. So these pieces of technology have been around for quite some time, and I think that a lot of these things are actually relatively easy to do. But a lot of people really don't know that there's even more compelling technology that sits behind the scenes for VDI. So what I've shown you is kind of the basic mobility strategy that we've got, show you how easily you can get in and get access to some of these things, and of course, it works just like that on the phone as well. But there's a number of core components that sit underneath of this virtual desktop technology that makes it more powerful than most people would imagine. So when you look at what a lot of people have seen from this, they say, well, I've seen terminal services. I remember that from 1995. It worked okay. It gave me the ability to get in and get access to some stuff. We've come a massively long way from that time. One of the first pieces is that we can scale this out tremendously, right? So in a lot of organizations, they're doing this for thousands of people, right? We have banking customers that have nothing but VDI for their entire implementation, and it makes the way that their workforce does their job dramatically different, because you can sit down at any place inside that organization and get the exact same stuff that you need at any point. Whether you're an actual cashier or teller, all the way back up to the executives that sit in their offices, they're all VDI users across the board for 40,000 users. So this isn't kind of an edge technology that we're just coming out with. We've got lots of government organizations. LA County is one of my favorites. I work with those guys all the time. They've got thousands and thousands of VDI desktops that they use for a number of different use cases. And down at our booth at VMware, we've got a tremendous number too, and along with some detail on some of the use cases that we have there as well. So I think that one big piece is key to understand, right? That this is easy to do today, and it can ramp up to whatever size we need in order to incorporate this technology for the users that you actually have. The second big piece is about these efficient display protocols. And there's been a lot of noise about this between a number of various companies, and I would say that all of the protocols that are used for this kind of technology today are fantastic. They're amazing. We can do all of the stuff that I've been showing you here today at about 100 to 200K worth of bandwidth on these things, right? So I could actually support multiple connections over my 4G network on my phone, and a lot of times I do that. I'll actually tether my iPad and actually support both of them off of just the connectivity that I have. I have to say that going to a lot of conferences and trade shows and things like that, a lot of times 4G is faster than the Wi-Fi that they've got available, right? Once you pack 3,000 or 4,000 people onto a couple of Wi-Fi access points, maybe you don't quite have as much bandwidth as you had to begin with. So it really gives you the ability at that point to start to break free and say, you know what, I've got my own connectivity, it's okay. I can actually take care of this without even getting in and getting access to these things. One of the other things that we've really tried to do is start to build in assist for some of these smaller devices. So we know that from time to time, as you get trapped onto these little devices, that it's actually hard to work. We have swipe-in interfaces now for the phone that allow you to swap back and forth between your Windows applications on demand, so that you can actually say, instead of trying to target that 2-pixel spot in the middle of the screen that you're trying to hit, we can actually add some additional capabilities that allow you to easily toggle back and forth between these pieces. So we call it, at VMware, we call this Unity Mobile. It's a relatively cool new feature, but anytime you're on one of these and you need to switch back and forth and do a lot of different things, it makes it much, much easier. And then one of the things that's changed just recently that I think is actually really, really cool is this concept of browser-based access. So previously, we've always installed something on your phone in order to do this, right? So if I wanted to use this kind of technology on my iPad or my phone, you had to go out to the App Store, download a free app, install it. For most of us, no big deal, right? 2 minutes worth of work. There's definitely certain audiences where that's a challenge, right? Sending them through the whole process. And because of the way some of these app stores work, it's not really easy today to kind of force them down to that process, especially if you don't own the device that they're actually working on. And a lot of cases, that's what we're talking about, right? A device that you've borrowed or a device that belongs to you personally at home and not the office. So it's harder to dictate exactly what's going to go down to these devices. We now have the capability to do what I was showing you here directly through a browser, right, with just HTML, with nothing else. And at the end of this session, if we have a little bit of time left, I'll actually fire that up on my iPad and let you guys see what that looks like as well. But it starts to become even more compelling now that it can be not only totally clientless, but we can start to bake this into portals inside of your organization. So now you could actually have a web page that people go to get access to the content, and a link that effectively takes them to a virtual desktop that has everything else that they need in order to do their job. And really at that point, you don't even need to install anything. You show up to work with a brand new device that's never even been configured, and you can be working in about 2 minutes by just logging in. So lots and lots of great stuff there. Looking at a number of different things to cut down the costs and to use some of the new disk technologies that are becoming very, very prevalent. And then the final one that I want to talk about is around 3D support, because I've worked with a couple of core agencies up here in the Sacramento area that do things like AutoCAD and geographic analysis and these kind of things. And one of the big challenges with those is that they're very, very graphic intensive, right? It's hard to do these kind of things within a model like this. Within our space now, we support graphics adapters from the major vendors, NVIDIA, for example, where you can put that in the back-end architectures for these things, share out those cards, and deliver a 3D experience that's just like what you have on your physical desktop. So now, if you're running ArcGIS, for example, or one of these kind of technologies, we can actually run those kind of things on the back end. We're talking to major airline manufacturers and oil companies that are doing this kind of analysis, and they're looking at this same technology because that used to be one of the most complicated use cases in the world, and we can now roll that back into the data center and start to bring in even those folks to this environment. So you imagine, if you will, this super heavy application, even something like AutoCAD that a lot of people think of needing a very, very large machine in order to run it. Now we can do that from our iPads in some cases. I mean, it's pretty compelling technology. And I have to say that the webification of apps, as long as that's coming along, that's really nice. AutoCAD isn't going web anytime soon, right? There's going to be a lot of these kind of technologies that still need some core processing behind the scenes. And with this type of thing, you're going to be able to pick up and use those from any device that you might have at that point in time. So I'm a big proponent of VDI. I live in it every day. Just kind of wanted to put those things out there. But I will say that from my perspective, virtual desktops, while they are powerful, they're just the very beginning, right? So there's a lot of scenarios where what I want to do is look at a PDF, or I want to pull up an Excel document, or I want to pull up a PowerPoint presentation like I'm using here. I don't need to log into a virtual desktop in order to do that. I probably already have a viewer on this device that can already handle those kind of things, so there's no need to have the additional burden of going along with that. In addition, as things do get webified, right, there's going to be a lot easier ways to access those components than kind of jumping through to another whole layer behind the scenes. So we see VDI as a bridge to this future, right? We know that you want to do webification. We know that people want to switch to web portals and all of these kind of things. And what we're saying is we know, we're right there with you, but we know you're not going to do it today and you're not going to do it tomorrow, right? There's going to be some lag in between. And we want to make sure that you have something that's going to support all of these use cases across the board. So in addition to VDI, one of the things that I think is the most important is file collaboration and sync, right? So the ability to really get your data wherever you might be and get that stuff delivered down onto your device itself. Now, from my perspective, right, like I use the use case of, kind of PDFs in the airport, but it makes a lot more sense when you've got departmental sharing and these kind of things that go along. And I can tell you that for most of our organizations that we work with, sharing data is one of the biggest challenges that they run into right now, and it's crazy that that's actually even a challenge at this point. You think that moving a file from point A to point B would actually be a relatively simple task. But what I've seen the actual process flow be in a lot of cases is I tried to send it through email, but my quota's too small. I tried to put it on the share, but we're out of space, so Dropbox, right? And as soon as you do that, you start to lose control of where all of that data is. It's now outside of the boundaries of your organization. While you probably know who's got access to it, you've got people signing up for all of these kind of services and things like that. So what's actually a much better way of dealing with this is on-premise hosting of technologies that can allow you to share this content between all of the various devices. At VMware, this is something that we call Horizon Data. It's part of our Horizon Workspace product. And what it does is it allows you to synchronize all of the content that you've got between that virtual desktop that you have, to your phone, to your iPad, to your Android device, to share it with your coworkers, for your users to decide who they share this content with. So rather than IT having to make blanket lists that say, I think you fit into this department, so you have access to this share, now you can actually create subgroups that actually represent the way that things actually work and share that content back and forth with those folks. You can even reach out and share this content to people outside of your own organization with a number of these technologies. So this actually works really, really well from that perspective. I'll show you what this looks like here in just a second. But for me, it kind of falls into three different categories, and they're all very, very important, I think. The first one is really around synchronization of data to your own personal cloud, right? And I know the word cloud gets overused. I try not to use it very often, but I think in this one, in this context, it actually makes a lot of sense, right? The idea that I have this kind of swarm of stuff that kind of floats around me at all times, right? We've got the physical world, and then you've got all of the data and the pieces of the stuff that we actually carry. And what this allows us to do is basically put a file in one location and have it automatically appear on all of the places that I'm going to work without really having to even think about it. So being able to say, oh, I need this PDF, I need this PowerPoint presentation that we're using here, I can instantly get in and get access to that content from whatever device that I'm actually carrying. And so I'll give you guys a little bit of an example of that. Just a second. So for me, my content, at least for today, looks like this. Just a couple of basic files, some PowerPoint presentations, some Excel, and all of these kind of things. All of this content is natively stored inside of servers in the same location that these virtual desktops are on. And I've got a folder inside of my virtual desktop called Horizon. Whenever I drop a file into that folder, it automatically appears on my phone. It automatically appears on my iPad. I can actually target it as a favorite. It'll cache it locally in an encrypted container inside of this device and keep it there so that even if I'm completely offline, I'll have access to all of those things. So now as I transition between that virtual desktop that has all of these Windows applications on it and all of the content that I'm looking for, now I don't have to worry about, oh, that's right, that Excel file is in there, let me log in 2 times to get access to it. I've already got that thing with me and ready to go. The same presentation that I'm using on my iPad here is synced to my phone so that if I had a problem with that, if my iPad broke, if I ran out of battery, whatever the case may be, I can pull up that exact same content. Now in this case, it's a 8 meg file. iPhones don't load PowerPoint presentations very quickly, so it's kind of the thing that you normally do a little bit in advance. But you get the basic idea, right? That I actually have all of the content that I'm looking for. Anything that I would need to present, I can effectively do this exact same presentation off of my phone right now today. And a lot of cases I do. The only thing that's a little awkward is that this thing tends to get in the way when you're trying to talk and walk around a little bit. So the idea of being able to do file sharing and collaboration with yourself, I think is kind of an interesting idea that even exists, but it's it's kind of a true to life kind of thing that we have these days. Now, once I've got all my devices synchronized and I've got the data that's kind of plugged in between these, the next step is, of course, sharing this with other people inside of my own organization. And this is actually really easy to do because you can just send invites to people, even if they're not inside of your normal work groups, right? So you have folks that are inside of your accounting department or whatever the case may be, and generally speaking, you're at the mercy of an admin to define somebody else that has approximately the same amount of rights that you do. And as soon as you get that defined, you find people that are outliers that don't match up with that. This allows you to pick and choose who has access to this content, and if they accept that invitation, we'll start synchronizing the files or the specific folders that you've recommended just down to those people that you've got. And you can choose whether they're allowed to reshare that content or whether they're kind of where the buck stops and they're the ones that are allowed to look at it. You can choose whether they can make changes to it, whether it's read-only. We even track changes to the individual files themselves. So now if you have somebody that goes in and completely screws up your PowerPoint presentation, deletes 20 of your slides out of the way, you can go back to a previous version, see who made the changes so you can send them a nasty gram afterwards, but go back to the previous working version of that presentation so that we can do this. And the thing that's critical about this is that it works on any platform, right? So I don't care if they've got a Mac, I don't care if they've got a Linux machine, I don't care if they've got a phone and that's all they use for their entire life. We can do all of this content directly to those devices without having to worry about that. And then finally, the piece that's really critical when you're working with folks that aren't inside your organization, a lot of times you want to just give somebody a file. Let me just show you this file that I've got. This PDF has the exact answer to the question that you're asking me, and I have no way of getting this file to you, right? Other than maybe email, and it might be too big for that. This technology also allows you to create public links where administrators allow, because this is a risky proposition in certain scenarios, and it allows you to share those links publicly either through email or directly as a kind of a download link that you can cut and paste to somebody without having to go through the rest of that content. So you can send somebody a link, they click on the link, and the file is exactly there as it is. Now this, of course, has some risks that go along with it. So on the back end, administrators have the capability to pull back this content. And if they do, if they remove content from one of these servers, it'll reach out to all of the places where it's been cached and remove the cached copies as well. So if I have a file on my phone accidentally that has a bunch of credit card information and IT spots that, they can yank that file on the back end. It'll reach out to my actual phone itself and pull the plug on that file. So it gives you a nice kind of sense of security that sits behind these kind of things as you build out these models. And it's got lots of other great features around quotas and these kind of things, but you get the idea that file collaboration, I think, is kind of the bridge between these components. And then kind of the last piece of this stack is really an application of the catalogs that go along, the catalog of the applications that go along with this. So as we do get to more of these web-oriented applications, we're really getting to a place where you don't have to use anything except for a browser to get access to this content. And at VMware, we're already building out this technology as part of our workspace, where we can do single sign-on to web applications, even through third parties, using standard authentication mechanisms like SAML, for example, which is very popular in this space. And by doing this, we can allow you to have a portal where you log in one time. You can get access to all of the files as I've showed you. You get access to your virtual desktops on demand. And for any of the web applications that you've already built out or are entitled to, we can actually pass single sign-on down into those applications and make them look seamless across the board with all of these things. So now for a user, they can worry a lot less about all of those components. And I can tell you this makes a dramatic difference for guys like me when you have 30 different websites and they have different password policies and all of these kind of things. Is that the one that supports 2 characters or an uppercase? So by being able to bypass all of that technology and do very, very fast single sign-on with a fallback to the virtual desktop so that you can get in and get access to not only Windows apps, but those browser-based apps that don't exactly work in all browsers. You got some IE6 compatibility and those kind of things. We can make sure that no matter what you actually have, you can get in and get connected to these types of pieces. And we do it with reporting and auditing, approvals, all of these kind of things as well to make sure that people aren't going out there and grabbing a lot of content that they shouldn't have. So we call this the Horizon Workspace. And the idea of tying all of these things together is exactly what we've got here today. And really the Horizon Suite and the Horizon Workspace really provides this level of mobility that we've been talking about. By tying in the applications, the data, the actual virtual desktops, and all of these things, makes for a very, very compelling space for a lot of these users. Now, let me just show you guys one more thing here real quick before I get past this, because I want to do this from the beginning. Timed out in between. There we go. So this is just a browser on my iPad here, which is not connected to the network, so I won't be able to show you that specific piece of it. But we can do the HTML access. We can do this. I could actually pick up anybody's device from the audience, get connected up, and get access to these same kind of pieces. So at this point, primarily the content that I've got, but I'm more than happy to take any specific questions or comments that anybody has from the audience. Okay, great. All right, so for those of you that'd like to see a demo of the HTML5 stuff, if you want to just hang in there for just a second, I'll get connected and we'll take it from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tether off of my phone for this specific piece. There we go. Just drop out of all these things. So this will be the same kind of 4G connectivity that I've got. I'm going to turn on my personal hotspot on my phone.
So I guess real quick question. So what you were showing a little bit before, where you're not using HTML5 through the browser, that's just an app installed on your device, basically?
Yep, that's exactly right. So we actually have a couple different ways of doing this. Primarily for people that would access this, we have something called the VMware View client, right? And a lot of folks have actually already seen this. It's exactly what allows you to get in and get access to that, and it's what I was showing you on the phone. And the same piece of technology works on the iPad as it does on the phone. So I can connect up and I can get access from this session here. Now that I've got a little bit of network connectivity, I'm going to put in my username and I'm going to put in my password that I have to change about 30 times a day because it doesn't hide it on iOS when you're on a projector. And what this is going to do is it's going to go out there and it's going to see that I've actually already got a connection established where I was showing you guys some of this stuff previously before. And even though I've got this device, don't need this one anymore because I've got a little bit bigger piece of glass, it'll go out, it'll find that session, and it'll pick up exactly where I left off with all of the content loaded up right where it was, right? So for that, this is kind of my favorite broken knee demo as part of this process. But I'll show you a couple other things as well as part of the integration. So the files that I was showing you on the phone and on the iPad itself, here you can see all of the same content. Here's my presentation that I've been using today. It'll launch that thing, and you can see exactly the same stuff. So, whenever I go out to do one of these things, I like to have a couple different backup plans just in case something should fail, right? So not only can I get to it from my actual phone, my actual iPad, I can get it from my virtual desktop, and I can pick up somebody else's device and effectively do the same presentation. So being able to get to that stuff is absolutely key. And then, of course, the traditional Windows pieces. Now, one thing that you can't see, and I'm more than happy to let people come up and take a look after the session here, is the sidebar that allows me to switch back and forth between multiple windows on the environment too. And the last piece is that I can actually use the entire screen as a touchpad as I do this. So for the iPad, you don't want to have to be trying to do a pinpoint. Nobody has a finger that's about 2 pixels wide at this point. So the ability to actually slide your finger around completely and use the mouse is much more natural and actually gives you a very large space. When you combine that with a hardware keyboard and those kind of things, it looks and feels really like an actual desktop does itself. All right, so let's see if we can see something very similar to that with HTML. Here we go. So this is one more time on that. Maybe we're not seeing that today. One more try on that piece. There we go. So from this perspective, once I've got my machine up, and let's say this is an iPad that I've never even touched before, nothing installed on it itself. This is just mobile Safari, which is the standard browser that's installed on any iOS device. When I connect to my environment, I have two choices. I can either download that client that I was just showing you guys, or I can select my Horizon HTML interface here. This is going to go out and it's going to take a look at these servers and figure out if I should be doing this. It's going to prompt me for my username and password. This is a slightly different environment, so you'll see a little bit different desktop. You'll have another password that you can try to remember. There we go. It'll go out and it's going to take a look at this environment here. It's going to see if I've got any virtual desktops that are available. I do. It'll fire up this Windows 7 64-bit desktop and get connected and get access to this. And I think that I was using this one yesterday at a slightly different show, and this one here should have a probably a Lego website demo. Yeah, there we go. Some folks were using it for some other video display and these kind of things. So there's a couple things that I want to point out about what you're seeing on the screen here right now. Number one, this is all in the browser, right? Nothing installed natively on the machine. Number two, this is a Flash website. iPads don't support Flash, right? So right off the bat, something pretty significantly different about that. This is still a remote demonstration coming across 4G on a phone that's actually in my pocket from my iPad. So not really, I'm kind of carrying my own cloud of devices for the connectivity. But because I was talking about some of the user-based pieces like being able to do touchpads and these kind of things, we can even in HTML render a touchpad on the screen so that you can use those kind of things as well to get in and get access to it. So again, this could be incorporated into a portal so that you could tie in and give people direct access to a lot of this content without having to even worry about what's actually on their device or even what kind of device they've got. So all you need is kind of a modern HTML5 browser. So if you think about it, as people go to Chromebooks, no problem, we've got it. Surface, IE, IE 10, 11, 12, all going to be HTML5 compatible. You find some brand new device that's just been created, you'll be able to fire up and get access to a virtual desktop from it right away. So contractors, people that don't have permanent access, when you go to visit your relatives and you need to borrow their computer for a minute, you don't want to leave anything behind, this kind of content allows you to very, very easily get in and get access to all of that. Yes?
Did you say you do or do not have the flash restriction on iPad?
Yeah, so iPad itself does not support Flash, right? So the native device does not, but our virtual desktops do. So this is a demonstration of how we're doing Flash remotely across the network to make that compatible with these devices. I think that's one of the big challenges that people ran into early on with these, is that there's a lot of web-based applications that are really Flash. And Adobe and Apple never supported Flash on the iPad to begin with, and the Android version of Flash is also gone at this point as well. So if you do have Flash applications, the only way to get access to those kind of things is through a virtual desktop technology like this on these devices. Okay. Any other questions? Great. Okay, well, we've got a booth downstairs. Happy to talk to you guys down there. Thanks. I really appreciate everybody coming in and giving me a chance to talk.